What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with reactions to the classics, and today we got a heavy metal reaction. We don't really have any of those up in here somehow. Of the top 10 best title tracks of albums released in the 1980s, brought to us by a friend, longtime supporter, patron of the channel, and pretty much expert on multiple genres of music, Slade said. Thank you, Slade said. Appreciate you. Appreciate all the patrons that make this thing go. If you'd like to support us in any way, check out the Patreon link below or the Patreon link on the end screen. Okay, we're going to get into Slade said's explanation of what we're doing here. He said, for my May list, I decided to go all in on old school heavy metal. Not a genre that's heavily represented on this channel. Not at all. I had my formative years in the 1980s, Slade said, and I was appalled by 80s pop music. I really hated that synthetic sound, and I still do. I was looking for something else, and so I turned to heavy metal, and on occasion, I still listen to some of that stuff, although my main musical interest has changed since then. I decided to make a top 10 list of the best title tracks of albums released in the 80s, just to remind myself what the fuzz was all about. Now, heavy metal fans are seriously devoted to their bands, and they definitely are. And doing this list will often result in a lot of, I can't believe you didn't pick X, Y, or Z. This is absolute garbage. I see that constantly, man. Comments. However, since the focus here is the 80s and not recent metal, I suspect the viewers to be a bit more mature and relaxed about it, so hopefully it'll be just fine. I am sure I've forgotten a song or two since it was all based on my memory of what I liked back then and I would still listen to occasionally today. Some more than others. So keep that all in mind so I don't got to police the comments, right? I get it if you want your person to be up there, but like these lists are very hard to make. I mean, so hard to make. He says, I don't think there's a genre which has as many subgenres as heavy metal, and that obviously needs to be addressed here since during the 1980s, heavy metal truly moved in a lot of different directions. The first and most important movement was the so-called new wave of British heavy metal, shortened to NWO-BHM, all right, which included bands like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, and Saxon, to name a few bands. Early Def Leppard, their first two albums, should also be included in this, even if their lead singer Joe Elliott persistently maintains that Def Leppard were never part of that. They should be mentioned here, however, since they were definitely a part of the subgenre that evolved into the terrible hair metal scene. As you can probably imagine, I have not included hair metal bands in this list, since I don't have much good to say about bands playing in that genre. Also, I don't consider it metal. I consider it, it's more hard rock to me. So here's the thing. I grew up in the 80s. I listened to popular radio. I watched MTV. Hair metal was everywhere. I realize hair metal is not good music, but for nostalgia purposes, I still like hair metal. So I know everybody loves to slam on it. It was everywhere. It's the best-selling albums. It was in the top 10 of the music charts. So like the reason why people liked it, because it was so popular. I don't like everything that's popular. When you're a teenager, right? That's just kind of what you're subjected to. So just wanted to get that in there. On the other side of the coin, there's a movement starting in the mid-80s, which went the total opposite way. Thrash metal combined NWO-BHM with punk rock so that you got the heaviness from metal combined with the do-it-yourself aesthetics of punk. This was much more my jam back then, but I've not included thrash metal on this list either, since it's much its own genre, and I wanted to focus on more classical heavy metal. Needless to say, with that in mind, subgenres of thrash metal, the extreme metal genres such as death metal, grindcore, and black metal, are also not represented here. This list is based on pure heavy metal, and even that can be debated, since, for instance, is doom metal a genre of its own, and should a band like Black Sabbath, arguably the inventors of doom metal, be excluded? I won't tell you that. I won't spoil it for you, whether it's on here or not. The list is as close as I could get to what was considered heavy metal back then, with not a lot of other genre tags added to them, but I respect and admit that a few of the bands are borderline true heavy metal. It is what it is. With all that said, let's get started with the only caveat that a band will only be represented once on this list, even if they had several great title tracks during the 80s. The already mentioned Black Sabbath being one example of this. So the music will not be in this video, but it will be at a Vimeo link below. I encourage you to listen along. Let's get started. You see it below. At number 10, we have Accept with Metal Heart, obviously from the Metal Heart album. They're all self-titled, but I'll still say that every time. Slade said, we kick off this list with a German heavy metal band. Accept were formed in 1976, but the actual roots of the band can be dated back to 1968 to the band Band X, which included, amongst others, lead singer of Accept, Udo Dirkschneider. The band released a self-titled album in 1979, but it was their fourth album, Restless and Wild, from 1983. They gave the band their first real breakthrough with the song Fast as a Shark, which is arguably one of the first thrash metal songs ever recorded. But even more, it was a song that would be used as the blueprint for speed metal, another subgenre of heavy metal. The commercial breakthrough and peak came with the follow-up album Balls to the Wall from 1984, particularly the title track making waves for the band. This song could easily have been my pick here, but I opted to go for the title track of the next album, Metal Heart, from 1985. Before we get into this song, I'll just say that Udo recorded one more album with the band, Russian Roulette, from 1986, before exiting Accept. He later returned for a few albums, but is no longer with the band, who are still releasing albums to this day, their most recent being Too Mean to Die from 2021. I know a few people that way. Metal Heart's an iconic heavy metal song made famous by the use cover of two famous classical themes, Tchaikovsky's Slavonic March in the intro and Beethoven's Für Elise in the guitar solo. Weirdly, this is by far the most famous song of the album. It was never released as a single, but two other songs were chosen instead, which just happens sometimes. Now, I will say this. Obviously, I've looked over this list. I mean, I didn't have to do any research on it because Slade Said's knowledge is so extensive, but I will say I was never a fan of true heavy metal. I've never heard, I think any song on here. I know the bands, I know stuff by them. It just wasn't my thing. So I'm curious what I'm going to think about this. If you watch this channel a lot, I'm going to tell you what I think about it, but I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. Thanks again, Slade Said. All right, Accept, Metal Heart. I actually dug that, man. I thought that was good. I liked the intro. I thought Udo had the right kind of voice for this. Wolf Hoffman, a member of the band, said years later, we had read an article that someone was working on an artificial heart and that one day everybody's going to have a computerized heart. It talked in general terms about how more and more of humanity gets sucked out of the daily life and more replaced by machine. It's not a new thing now. I don't know when this quote's from because it didn't say. But then it was new. Human versus machine was the general vibe of the record. And that's kind of what you get from the lyrics. And I know the lyrics aren't crazy important in the genre, but yeah, I thought it was actually a really good song. All right, next up at number 9, we got Manowar Battle Hymn from the Battle Hymns album, plural. Slade said, for our next pick, we crossed the Atlantic to find the quintessential heavy metal band. Often ridiculed on their over-the-top heavy metal lyrics and antics, Manowar is a band that we can't ignore on a list such as this. They were formed in New York in 1980 and released their debut album Battle Hymns in 1982. They still exist to this day, although their album output is now with long breaks between albums, which you can understand. Manowar was founded by bassist Joey DeMeo and guitarist Ross the Boss Friedman. They were joined by lead singer Eric Adams and drummer Donnie Hasmick. Joey and Eric are still with the band today. Manowar are infamous for their heavy metal aesthetics. They seem to live and breathe heavy metal, and their most famous trademark is the line "Death to False Metal," which is their rant against hair metal and the claim that when other bands play, Manowar kill. In 1984, the band was included in the Guinness Book of World Records for delivering the loudest live performance ever, a record they have broken twice. They also hold the record for the longest heavy metal concert by a professional band after playing 5 hours and 1 minute at the Bulgaria Kavarna Rockfest in 2008. During their career, they sold more than 30 million copies, so Manowar is a big player within heavy metal. The band got off to a good start as their debut was well received and even today is counted amongst their best albums. They got some unexpected help as they needed a voiceover to one of the songs of the album Dark Avenger. The legendary actor and movie director Orson Welles agreed to do the voiceover on the song, as well as the song Defender, which would appear on the band's 5th album, Fighting the World, from 1987, even if Orson Welles' speak was actually recorded at the same time. The band had somewhat jokingly said they needed a voice like his, but their representative at the record company took it seriously and approached him, and he accepted, much to the astonishment of this, at the time, very unknown band. That's crazy. Anyway, I digress. This is about title songs, and with that in mind, let's move on with the song. And this song is 9.5 minutes long. And I think that's one of the things that always turned me off about heavy. I'm not a huge fan of long songs. A couple of these songs are 7 minutes of this style of music because it gets very repetitive for me. So let's see what this does for me. All right, Battle Hymn. First, the negative, and there's not much. Those last 2 minutes could have gone, right? It could have been a 7-minute song or 7.5 minute song. The stretch out, or maybe the last minute and a half could have went out with all the drumming and the guitars, and that'd be fine. But I could have done without those last, 2 minutes, minute and a half. But on the positive side, that was a great song, man. The change-ups, the different things they did, it did not feel like a 9.5 minute song until the very end there. But I digress. I'm not trying to harp on this. It's actually going to end up in my favorites. I couldn't believe that it wouldn't. I was pleasantly surprised with this. Next up, you see it below, Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime, the title track from that album, We stay in the USA for our next pick, Slade said. Queensryche is a band from Bellevue, Washington, and is a band that I'm sure Manowar would disapprove being on this list, as this is a band bordering hair metal in style and looks, but most of all, they probably should be considered pioneers of progressive metal or prog metal, in short. Another subgenre of heavy metal, which early on also included bands like Fate's Warning and Dream Theater. I have not included the two latter bands on this list, however, as they to me are more clear-cut prog rock, whereas Queensryche is somewhat between traditional heavy metal, hair metal, and prog metal. They're formed in 1981 and peaked commercially and creatively with the album Operation Mindcrime from 1998 and the 1990 follow-up Empire. Founding member, lead singer Jeff Tate is no longer with the band, but Queensryche still exists to this day as released albums regularly since their self-titled 1983 debut. Now he's talking to me. You've done a full album reaction on this channel, so I won't go much deeper in the story behind the concept album. And I will only add that the album to me is clearly the high point of the band. Look, I have a full album reaction to this album. This album is absolutely fantastic. It is just great. So let's get to it. All right, Operation Mindcrime. Great guitar work, great vocals there by Jeff. If you like this song, right, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Go watch the full album reaction that I did of this because I'll explain the concept to you and stuff. But I mean, in this song, Dr. X is giving Nicky his heroin fix and turning Nicky into this killer to do what he wants. Give you the drugs, you do what I want. Controlling him, right? Operation Mindcrime. There you go. Next up, we have a group who I know Trey has run their entire discography. I've never listened to one album. Judas Priest, Screaming for Vengeance. Obviously, the Screaming for Vengeance album. So I said for our number 7 pick, we finally moved to England where heavy metal arguably began. And no other band can probably take as much credit for this as Judas Priest, at least along with Black Sabbath. They were one of the leaders of the NWO BHM, and their influence on the genre cannot be overstated. They popularized the twin lead guitar attack in heavy metal, with KK Downing and Glenn Tipton being the guitarist, and combined with Rob Halford's vocals, they had a pretty unique sound in the world of heavy metal. Formed in 1969 in Birmingham, they've sold over 50 million copies during their career. As of their third studio album, Sin After Sin, they had 11 consecutive albums that were certified gold or more in the U.S. British Steel from 1980 was their first platinum album in the U.S., with the singles Living After Midnight and Breaking the Law receiving a lot of radio airplay. Their best-selling album is the 1982 album Screaming for Vengeance, which featured the major hit single You've Got Another Thing Coming. Now, I do know that song. The album was certified double platinum in the U.S. Judas Priest is still going strong, although they've had some difficult years after the otherwise successful Painkiller album from 1990. Rob quit the band after Painkiller and only returned to the beginning of the new century. He was replaced by Tim Ripper Owens, who is a good singer in his own right, but was never really accepted by the Judas Priest fans as the band's vocalist. KK Downing quit the band in 2011 and has been replaced by new guitarist Andy Sneap. Their latest album, Firepower, from 2018, is classic Judas Priest. All right, let's get it. All right, Screaming for Vengeance. Glenn and KK's guitars were the highlight for me. Dave Holland on the drums was fantastic. When it first started, I'm like, yeah, this is the stuff I don't really love. I mean, it wasn't horrible, but the more it went on, the more I liked it. This one actually does have some interesting lyrics to it. Kind of anti-establishment, right? In the first verse, he's just telling them, don't listen to them. They're basically trying to poison your mind, fill your brain with orders, and that's not right. They're playing out a game that draws you closer to your living in a world that's ruled by fear. So this one actually has some good lyrics. And way later on, Rob Halford said, it's like the establishment thing, which sounds like a very old ploy. But when I talk about them, I'm talking about this element of control of power that can be taken on. And when I say they or it's them, it's that side of what you want to try and do that is against you, that is opposing you. I suppose it's authority to a certain extent, although I think authority has its rightful place to prevent bad situations. I wouldn't decry that we do not need that sort of control because there are crazy people in the world and somebody's got to keep them in place. I thought that was a pretty interesting quote. He's right. It wasn't just all speak out against authority because there is a reason for it. But boy, when you need to speak out, you need to. Coming in at number 6, we got a band I've never even heard of. We got Riot with Fire Down Under. Obviously, the Fire Down Under album. Slade says, return to the USA for our next pick. New York's Riot was formed in 1975 by guitarist Mark Reel, who was joined by, amongst others, lead vocalist Guy Speranza. Guy appeared on Riot's first 3 albums, with the third album, this one, Fire Down Under from 1981, being the band's peak both in terms of commercial success and critical acclaim. Guy has left the band since. To his mind, his religious beliefs were not compatible with being the lead singer of a heavy metal band. This is a pity, as the replacement Rhett Forrester wasn't as good of a fit with the band. He only lasted 2 albums before a new singer, Tony Moore, was introduced, and while he was a much better fit for the band, to me, Riot is primarily defined by the first 3 albums, with this one, Fire Down Under, being the obvious highlight, with the songs Swords and Tequila and Outlaw being the shining stars and top shelf classic heavy metal. But the whole album is a must-have for any classic heavy metal fan. I'll tell you, man, you can survive the loss of anybody but your lead singer. Now, it gets tougher if the other people are writing all the music or writing all the lyrics, but you can sometimes survive, right? But you as that lead singer, man, it's almost always, if it's not a death sentence, you definitely have just a huge fall off in popularity. All right, Fire Down Under, a quick song, right? This was song number 6. So of our 6 songs left, 3 of them are 7 minutes, 2 of them are in the 2-minute range, and 1 of them is 5 minutes. So a definite difference in some of these. It's a fine song. I mean, there's not a lot to the lyrics. You can kind of figure it out. Fire Down Under. Great guitar work here. I thought the guitar work was the highlight. They don't have musicianship credit on here, but I'm going to guess that it's Mark Rio. And then guy's voice is fine. It's classic heavy metal. So it's just a nice little quick driving guitar and drum tune. And next up, we're going to get to one of those 7-minute tunes. We got Ancient Dreams from Candlemass in the Ancient Dreams album. So like I said, we changed continent and pace again for our next pick. Sweden's Candlemass was the first obvious heirs to the throne of doom metal. And so we moved from the fast-paced Fire Down Under to a slow, psalm-like doom metal song with Candlemass, which Candlemass were and are, as they still exist, masters of. They were formed in Stockholm in 1984 by bassist, songwriter, composer, and bandleader Leif Edling. They recorded their first album, Epicus Doomicus Metallicus, which is very telling of their style, which is often described as epic doom metal, an album which received a lot of praise within the metal community. Even better received was the follow-up 1987's Nightfall, which is generally viewed as a doom metal masterpiece. The album introduced new singer Messiah Markolin, who has a unique voice in heavy metal with his operatic style. He continued on the following 2 albums, Ancient Dreams from 1988, which is this one, and Tales of Creation in 1989, before disagreements between him and the other band members forced him to leave the band. He returned for a short stint in 2005 where he appeared on 1 album before leaving again due to not being credited for the lyrics and being paid accordingly. That's a big no-no because the lyrics are more money than the singing. Messiah's lyrics were very religiously focused with lots of Christian values and associations. Candlemass has had a good few different vocalists and still put out new records to this day, their latest being 2022's Sweet Evil Son. Their singer since 2019 has been Johan Langvist, who was the original singer on the debut album. Wow, things come full circle. Nightfall does not contain a title track, so for this list, I went with the title track of Ancient Dreams. All right, Ancient Dreams, Candlemass. I thought the guitar work on here was fantastic. It's definitely had almost like a Metallica sound to it to me. Now, I'm not a metal expert, and right now Slade said maybe watching this and cringing, but Messiah's voice was okay for me. I thought Lars Johansson on the lead guitar was fantastic. So, and then the drumming, of course, in this genre of music is very important. A little bit of a, wizardry type theme here, little sci-fi, little great kings and tyrants, unicorns and elf lords. So a little bit of that feel to it, a little Lord of the Rings feel. It was fine for me. Next up, we have the great Motorhead, their title track off Ace of Spades. So like I said, we changed pace again with our next song. Motorhead's a band which most would agree belonged to a list such as this. However, founding member of the band, Ian Lemmy Kilmister, would have, I never know how to say his last name, so I know I just butchered it. He's just Lemmy to me. Would have a different opinion as he never viewed his band as a heavy metal band. To him, Motorhead was a rock and roll band, and if anything, they were more punk than metal. Who knew? Nevertheless, the band was always associated with heavy metal by the public eye, and their opening acts when on tour was always a heavy metal band when I saw them live, and I've seen them a lot of times, and they played on numerous metal festivals, and I would guess never or very rarely on punk rock festivals. I would think that too. So I think it's fair to say that they have been an important part of heavy metal. They were formed in 1975 in London, although Lemmy himself was from Stoke. I did a band biography on Motorhead on a recent top 10 on this list, so I won't go into much detail this time. I will just say that for this list, I considered a number of title tracks since Motorhead, especially in the 70s and 80s, always had great title tracks. Ace of Spades is by far their most known song, at least outside wrestling circles. Yes, Triple H shout out. But for a long time, I had listed Orgasmatron from 1986 as a song I'd pick here. To me, it's a better track, but I went with Ace of Spades as it's their most iconic song. Ace of Spades, only 2 minutes, 45 seconds, man, but it's fantastic. Lemmy's vocals, it's just unmistakable. You know what? I think I've heard this song once or twice in my life. There's just nowhere I would have heard it, right? I know it's a really famous song. So he's just talking about, he's using the Ace of Spades. It's kind of known as a death card. That's actually a myth, but all the way back in Vietnam, this is on the Apocalypse Now. It's in the Apocalypse Now, great masterpiece movie as well. But when American soldiers would kill of Viet Cong, they would put an ace of spades on them as psychological warfare, because supposedly in Vietnam it meant a death card, but they said that was a myth as well. There's a lot of interesting stuff. So it's not just what it sounds like, right? He's kind of gambling with his life. So obviously guitar work is just next level with Eddie Clark. The bass by Lemmy is fantastic. All right, we're to the top three. We got Dio, The Last in Line title track. I said at the start that no band will be included more than once on this list, and that is correct. However, that does not mean that a member of a band won't be included more than once. So it is with Ronnie James Dio, spoiler alert, who was, of course, also a member of Black Sabbath in the early 1980s and later again. After he left Sabbath, he began a long solo career, or rather he founded a band in his own name. They debuted in 1983 with the album Holy Diver, from which I could easily have picked the title track, but my personal taste requires me to pick the title track of the follow-up album, 1984's The Last in Line, which is a truly epic heavy metal song by what is perhaps the best voice in heavy metal history. I know a little Dio from high school. There was a few of his songs I liked. I don't even remember what they were, but yeah, Dio's fantastic. The Last in Line, that epic fade out that we had back in the day. So Dio's voice is fantastic. I thought the keys, although it's subtle on here when it comes in, it really punches up. Claude Schnell and Dio himself are playing those. The guitar work with Vivian Campbell is fantastic. I mean, it's all fantastic. Vinny Appice on the drums. But, you know, Dio's voice is fantastic. I like the build, right? The first verse is pretty slow. And then, you know, we just come in with that power, The Last in Line. He's basically talking about in the song, like, you don't really know where you're going, heaven or hell, until that day, right, when you die. So it kind of all leads and has allusions up to that. And he actually talked about that a little bit. He said this song has different interpretations. He said this in 2003, so a while afterwards. You could be the last in line, meaning, oh no, all the good stuff is already gone. Or you could be the last, the strongest, and to me, it's always been that. The perseverance that comes from going through challenges in life. And when you get to the end, and you're the last one standing, and you ask yourself, was it worth it? You better say yes. That's going to be my answer. So, Dio, fantastic. All right, we got two acts left. We got Black Sabbath, the title track from Heaven or Hell. Slade said, okay, so I have mentioned a number of times that Black Sabbath would feature on this list, and finally it's here. It could have been number one, but that is really the case for a number of songs on the list, to me, to be honest. Black Sabbath had experienced a decline in popularity during the second half of the 70s, with heavy drug abuse being a factor, and the clear drop in quality in the last two 70s albums, Technical Ecstasy from 1976 and Never Say Die from 1978. Ozzy Osbourne was fired by the band in 1979, and they recruited Dio as his replacement. With Dio in the band received a boost of new energy, and the two albums he fronted were both commercially and creatively massive improvements compared to the previous couple of albums. Heaven and Hell is generally considered the better of the two Dio-era albums, but I would argue that the highlights of Mob Rules at least equals Heaven and Hell. The two title tracks are very even in terms of quality to me, and it's pretty much a coin toss that decided which song I went with. So fun fact, I've never listened to a complete Black Sabbath album. I don't know why, I just haven't. But my partner in crime, Trey, is going through their entire discography, and he just finished Never Say Die. That's up on the channel. And we're doing the two Dio albums as well, so that's going to be next in line. So even though I've never listened to one, I know their complete story because I do all the research. So I know all about it. Like when Dio came in, he didn't even know that he just got invited to the studio by them. He didn't know they'd fired Ozzy. He didn't know. He just thought he was going to hang out. And they said, hey, you want to jump in here and sing this? And then they just realized that it was magic. So anyway, it's just interesting, man. So I've never heard this, but I wanted to hear this. So I'm glad that Slade said, brought it. Let's do it. Heaven and Hell. Subject matter very similar to the previous track, which was Ronnie James Dio as well, just on his own, well, with his band Dio, The Last in Line. Heaven or Hell. So, you know, which path are you going down? I thought the lyrics were fantastic. Obviously, the guitar work from Tony Iommi is fantastic. I mean, all the musicianship, you know, Geezer on the bass, Bill Ward on the drums. So just fantastic. You know, Dio's vocals are absolutely fantastic. He had this to say about the song. He said, you never write a song and say, I've just written an epic, because that's not for you to judge. It's for the people. All these years later, I listen to this song and say, yeah, they're right. It's a great song. And it was just one great album. It's usually the first project you do with new musicians that turns out to be the best. Tony and I had some real magic going on in the studio on this one. I always wanted to write a song called Heaven and Hell, and it expounds on my belief that the earth can be a place for both good and bad. How you live is up to you. The lyric is true. The world is full of kings and queens who will blind your eyes and steal your dreams. Life is full of inconsistency. Some recurring themes on this album of life, right? But he considered it to be his best song that he'd ever written. I would say Drumroll Please #1, but you already cheated and looked below, but probably not many people surprised as if they were Italian, who has not been on the list so far. We got Iron Maiden, Power Slave from that album. Slade said, you simply can't make a heavy metal list without including Iron Maiden. It's as simple as that. Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, and Iron Maiden. These three bands in particular are essential when heavy metal is the subject. Iron Maiden was formed in 1975 in London, England by bassist Steve Harris, who also has been the primary, but not only composer throughout the band's career. On the first couple of albums, the lead vocals were handled by Paul Di'Anno, but he was sacked mainly due to drug issues, but also because the band wanted a different singing style. Paul had some punk leanings in his vocal style, and Steve Harris is known for his absolute distaste for anything punk. Paul's replacement was Bruce Dickinson, of course, and this obviously proved to be a very successful move for the band. First album featuring Bruce was 1982's The Number of the Beast, and while the first two albums had both sold well for heavy metal albums, The Number of the Beast was on a totally different level. Topped the UK album chart and reached top 40 in the US. It sold more than 20 million copies worldwide, and it's one of the most popular heavy metal albums of all time. So I could easily have chosen the title song of the album as it is classic Iron Maiden. However, just like the issue with Sabbath, Iron Maiden had a lot of great title songs during the 1980s, and it wasn't an easy pick. But in the end, I went with 1984's Power Slave. All right, I don't know a lot of Maiden. They've shown up on live streams that we do. A song reaction here or there, maybe pop onto a list, but not much. All right, let's go. All right, Power Slave, #1, Iron Maiden. For Slade said, you know, like when it started, the first like maybe third of the song, I'm like, yeah, it's fine. It's good. It's just kind of not my thing. But the more it went on, man, the more it definitely grows on you. So maybe that's why this song has to be 7 minutes long. The guitar work from Adrian Smith and Dave Murray was just fantastic. And, the drumming by Nico McBrain is next level, man. But they broke the guitar down into like two different solos that ran into each other with just a difference on that. So I'm sure one was Adrian, one was Dave, but just fantastic, man. Fantastic stuff. Bruce's vocals are unmistakable, right? Power Slave. It's one of those fantasy type songs about a pharaoh and, he's going to die. He's just a man, even though, he's the slaves and everyone were kind of submissive to him. Now he's about to die. So he's just a slave to the power, right? Slave to the power of death. And that's how it ends. So obviously a fitting choice at #1. I don't think a lot of people would have any issue with that. And now we're going to go to my favorite tracks. And there's a lot more than I honestly thought there was going to be going into this. Honorable mentions the first song, Accept, Metal Heart. Also Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime. I try to be objective on that. I love that album, but, this is an honorable mention on this list. And also the last song, Iron Maiden, Power Slave. Faves, Black Sabbath, Heaven or Hell. Dio, The Last in Line. Similar songs as far as subject matter. Dio's on both of them. Motorhead, Ace of Spades. And my favorite is actually the longest track, right? Man of War, Battle Hymn. So fantastic list, fantastic artist. Am I going to go jam some of these albums in my spare time? I'm probably not. But did I enjoy this list? I definitely did. And one thing about Slade said, so much about different genres of music. It's always an education. I always enjoy it. It's always eye-opening, man. You got to keep an open mind, even if you're approaching your ancient years, such as myself. So let me know what you think of this list. Who else should have been there? But be respectful, right? It's hard to do this. And until next time, guys, I will see you.